These are two of the potentially most hyped games of 2025 coming to crowdfunding. Earth, with the latest expansion, Animal Kingdom. And in front of me here, we have the preview deck copies of Hubworld Aidalon. And these are going to make waves. Completely different games, mechanics, and approaches, but a huge amount of interest. Let me tell you how I feel with hands-on. Let's go. Now in front of me, we're going to start with Hubworld Aidalon, and we're just going to refer to it as Hubworld because I think that's a better name for it as a whole. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. That is actually part of the other problem with this game right now, the thematic incorporation, as well as the terminology that takes a little bit to wrap your mind around, and then we'll get away from the obvious Netrunner comparisons until later. But essentially, what you're doing from Earthborn Games here, a spin on their LCG taste in the Netrunner vibe. And what you've got here are the two preview decks that they sent out with Team Covenant that all you do is pay for shipping. So I paid for shipping, and we're talking about it here. The basic gist of this is you have your pre-constructed deck prior to playing. You have a seeker, your leader, if you will. And for demonstrative purposes here, what I've done is I've created a 3x3 grid, which represents your area, if you will, that you're trying to, well, defend, control, and optimize. Because the goal of this game is that throughout the deck, the area in front of you, or even your discard pile, you're going to have cards that are called agents among all of the other types. And the goal is to secure your opponent's agents by paying their break cost, essentially. And you're going to be doing this while sort of pseudo bluffing, manipulating, and calculated gambling, with the key point of this game being right from the get-go that the better, more skilled person should win. So if you're interested in a type of game like that, let's talk a little bit more. The main portion of this game is described by playing cards, forging them, and then delving at your opponent on an action-by-action, round-by-round system where you have 3 actions per turn, and then your round is over. Rinse and repeat about who goes first and who goes second if you're playing a 2-player game, and you go again until somebody secures 3 of those agents. The main action cards are listed out here on the round structure. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but the main point of this is you're going to be having shards that are going to be how you're going to be essentially getting your cards onto the field to protect your 3 distinct areas, and then also forging them, i.e. you actually place them face down, like I have here, to flip them over to activate them. And sometimes, and this is the most dynamic part of the game, sometimes it's better to have them face down, sometimes you have to wisely choose them face up, sometimes you want to surprise your opponent by doing both of those things. And that is a very peculiar point because you are going to be having defenses, you are going to be having basically ways to mitigate and block your opponent's delves, but also those agent cards need to be played because they're potentially, as weird as this sounds, less vulnerable when they're on the playing table than they are in your discard pile or your hand. And these 3 lanes are representative of those 3 areas, which we'll talk about in a second. Shards, this top action, is the main resource that you're going to be paying to do a lot of the best and cool things in this game. Drawing your cards, because you do not automatically draw back up except for the end of a round. Stage an agent, that means to play it to the table. Shift a card, so moving it around in your grid. Playing a moment with an ability, so just an action ability. Using an ability on your forged card, so the flipped over card, because you'll have instants as well as abilities that are stand alone and stay out there, and then delve, but you can't do that as your first action in the game. Refreshing is very simple. You basically reset your action tokens, get a additional shard, discard down to 10 shards if you have more, draw a card, unexhaust your cards past the first player token, and that's it. So like I mentioned, the actual mechanics of this game are very straightforward in terms of your options. But where the true depth and the potential lies is that there is a hell of a lot to do with all of those mechanics that are on these cards in the first place. And that's the tricky aspect of things as a whole. This is the cost to forge it. This is the cost to break it. This is the cost to get by it as an obstacle. It also has when engaged, essentially action, and then when discovered. So there are a lot of different elements here, and the terminology, frankly speaking, is rather unintuitive once you compartmentalize it and make a mental note that, okay, this means my hand, okay, this means to forge it, this means to play it to the table, this means to... Those things start making more sense. And that's probably the biggest problem and barrier to trying to get this game to the table in the first place right now. So I kind of wish they would simplify that and just say, you know what, we're going to use the colloquial terms rather than our made-up terms to describe thematic incorporation within our world. So take that for what you will. Again, this is you engage with this card and you have an ability to do and to react to this. If you discover it, meaning on your delve, when you are going at one of these lanes, the whole objective is to get through these lanes and then to get to those piles that I mentioned. The left lane being towards the discard pile, the middle lane being towards my hand, and then the right lane being towards my draw pile. And so what that does is that allows you to look into those piles for a certain number of cards and then secure them, as they say, or break them, meaning, i.e., I can remove them from those areas. And that's where I'm going to be searching for those agents, because you can have them show up in all of those areas. You can hide them in your discard pile, getting rid of them there and really protect that. You can try and hide them within the many cards of your hand, or you can just hope that they're not coming up on your draw deck as one of the next cards. And therein lies the unique dynamic and the whole purpose of multiple delves, repeated attacks constantly, because this is the aggressor winning the game. This is almost more of a war type. You need to be attacking, but very smartly, though, because it can also backfire as you're figuring out what your opponent's traps are laid for you. And many a delve will be stopped way too early because of, well, some rash decision making in the same time, trying to be the aggressor. Because the whole purpose of the delve is not necessarily to just get the agents, but it's to set yourself up for success as you're going on throughout the rest of the game. Because what you can do is, even if you do not get a card successfully, you can add heat to each of those three particular areas, meaning I can pay shards to gain extra heat overall, because the overall heat that you have determines how many of those cards you get to potentially look at from each of those three categories. And other cards will give you heat. Other cards may allow you to actually remove heat as a mitigation. And that is just a really, really neat mechanic. Because, okay, well, maybe I can't pay for actually securing or, getting that agent that I just found, but I can give you an extra heat. So now instead of me getting to look at 2 cards next time, I'm going to get to look at 3 of your cards because the price was just too much. Similarly, you run into obstacles, because if you have a forged card, this is where the dynamic comes in. Some of your cards will have that discoverable element on here. Some of them may actually have a wall element, an obstacle element. So if you want to even proceed, you have to pay this cost. And then you have to decide whether or not you want to get rid of this card for this cost if you're willing to pay for it. But if you pay for this cost to get rid of this card so you don't have to deal with it next time, because you have to break through, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, every single time on this part, you have to pay for this. But then if you pay for this, will you have enough if the next card down the line, in this case, was actually an agent? So maybe you spent your second to last one, and now you don't have the 3 to break this one because it's already there, because it's forged, and you want to be able to, get there next time. But if you pay for this one now, then you're not going to have enough to do both of these this time. And again, the dynamic is actually really great, because you may not want to have this agent exposed, but if this agent isn't exposed, then their barrier doesn't go up. And then when they get discovered, then they just have to pay this cost, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And so that's the dynamic. And then some of these cards will also have symbols along the sides, which you can then tap and utilize to get extra income, because you'll also notice that your leader cards here have similar shards, your currency, as well as drawing an extra card, because that is the other awesome thing. They're exhausted. Well, if they're exhausted, you get through them easier. So if your opponent is trying to balance the resource management with the ability to defend themselves, that is just the tension that really, really, really works. And that's the game in a nutshell as a gist, right? You have your different asymmetric dynamic leaders of the 4 different factions, the abilities that you're going to use to fine-tune, potentially, your deck construction in the first place. You've got the agents that I mentioned. And then you also have your various other 3 types of cards that I alluded to. Your sources, your obstacles, and your moments. Your moments are your instants that you'll be playing. Then you have your obstacles, like I said, they're going to get in the way for the most part. And then you have the sources, which again are going to give you more potential resources. Don't have the barrier, but again are going to have a little bit higher costs to deal with that are actually going to be more beneficial for you for the most part. The dynamic of interwoven combinations of these cards is pretty outstanding. And again, I'll say this as now the flip side of things. Let's go, okay, what are my concerns? What are my issues with this game already? Well, the matter is right now that we don't even have a complete rule set. The glossary for this game is relatively large already, even just with the preview content that we have. And at the time of me filming this, we don't know what the deck construction is actually going to look like. We don't know what the card situation is going to be. You know, do you have to have like an Arkham Horror LCG style of things where you need 2 separate starter sets, in the old version at least, to actually get the combination of multiple cards into a situation that you want, like a Star Wars Unlimited right now? What is going to be the self-contained? How many decks productively can I build out of a core set, for example, with this? Also, the theme is, it's meh. It's kind of okay-ish. Again, the comparison that I alluded to at the beginning of the video with the Netrunner situation, it's there because you're going in and you're trying to attack in that variety, but it doesn't feel as strongly incorporated in the rise and the fall and the tension and the mechanical approach of this game alone is very solid just on the surface. And what you can do with this, I'm really excited to see, right? But that's the other problem, is that this is so limited. This is so limited that is it going to be just impossible to create? Or what are the actual rules to go along with all of these cards going to look like in terms of how many agents and what color types and the situations that you're going to be able to interweave? And again, there's not a whole lot. How much, like with the Star Wars Unlimited, can I have of this faction and this faction? What is the balancing act if I want to have something that doesn't quite fit? Am I allowed to do that? And what are those, you know, pieces interlocking going to look like? And how easy is that going to be accomplishing? Again, because, you know, the whole purpose of being able to do this is to be able to get in and fully utilize it. And so that's my worry, is that in order to get the legs that you want out of this game, it's going to cost you $200 up front or something along those lines, right? Because this is ultimately a competitive construction game. And other things that we have seen along those lines, whether it is a Netrunner, whether it's a Codex, or anything along those situations, eventually to have the experience that people who are the mainstream folks looking for this, they're going to want this much. And comparatively to other pre-constructed things, your Summoner Wars, your Battle Cons, right? Where you can get those larger overarching pledges or buys, if you will, but you can also get just a couple and be very well self-contained. And I'm sure you can self-contain here, but are you going to be contained with what you're wanting to purchase if all you can do is have this little pre-constructed deck, which, again, it's very solid from a preview standpoint, an aperitif, a tasting, if you will. But ultimately, I feel like I'm still missing a ton of actual game here. As enticing and as potentially driven as this is, there are still a lot of question marks of what can it be? What is the model going to look like? How much development can I actually have? Do I need to buy multiples to get the full experience? Again, like, it's sort of in a different way, like we talk about with other crowdfunding projects where there are exclusives or there are expansions that seem like they were pulled from the base game to begin with. Is that going to be this situation? Now, not like an LCG Earthborn situation with their first game, and it's more, again, competitive rather than, an enclosed bubble. So that is my big concern. That's why I'm also a little trepidatious, but excited at the same time. Now, let's talk about Earth and an abundance more of Earth, but not the abundance that you're familiar with. What we're talking about here is Animal Kingdom, the second expansion, or in the terms I like to think of, what I wanted out of the first expansion, if you will. We'll get to that. But essentially, Animal Kingdom is just really giving you animals. And that sounds super straightforward. That sounds super simple. Earth, the preeminent tableau building, nature themed board game. If you're not familiar with Earth, let's talk about that for a second, and then I'll highlight what the animals are bringing in this Animal Kingdom extension. So the tableau building of a 4x4 grid is the mainstay still of Earth, if you remember. And so you're essentially a race to the finish of resource manipulation across several different ways of planting, growing, seeding, and, well, manipulation of them back and forth in order to be the first one to complete the tableau, triggering the end game scoring. And this system is still very much the same. None of the base core systems of this are any different. However, I will say right now, this is also what I prefer out of an expansion, if you gave me my choice, comparatively to abundance, and we'll talk about that, why that is, in a second. And the system, again, still very similar. Quick recap is that it's a follow the leader situation. You take one of your 4 actions, you get the strong, they get the weak, you activate cards of a certain color, rinse and repeat with the tundras and the environments and the fauna that you'll be manipulating, dealing with, and composting all along the way. Your leaf action-based economy system, in order to score on the faunas for additional endgame victory points, remains the same, but that is the tie-in twist for the Animal Kingdom. And the best part about this game, just from the get-go, and this is my biggest query or potential contention with expansions nowadays on the hobby side of things in the first place, is the balance between how much we're adding in terms of rules, overhead, complexity, strategy, and just growing what I'm trying to keep track of, versus the sly, subtle, slithery integration that systems can incorporate with already ingrained pieces of the game in the first place. And this one falls into the latter, to my joy, which is why ultimately, as much as I don't mind the additional mechanic approach of abundance, if you gave me my choice, this is going to be my one and only if I had to choose, hands down, no questions asked. And that's because of how it integrates, how my brain works, and also, just like I said, my preference of one versus the other. Don't fear though, because if you're hearing this and you're going, Chris, Earth was already too simple for me, this is still going to offer you enough of a slight increase of strategic depth and choosing of the optimization timing that the animals need to be very carefully incorporated with, to allow you to tickle your fancy in a slightly higher level. And so what you're doing with this Animal Kingdom is incorporating them into the turn-by-turn structure. They are not an additional phase of things. They are not an additional layer of over-the-top learning, but they are seamlessly thrown in to weave a very, very tight pattern going on here. Essentially what we've got is we've got a large deck of 36 different animals that are going to be available to us. And also, if you're like me and you're going, Chris, I'm not a completionist, can I play this without abundance? Yes, 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 yes. Because about 98% of this is completely compatible without abundance. I believe in the prototype rulebook that I have, only 2 of the animals need to be taken out because they integrate with a mechanism or resource that is only in the abundance side of things. So if that is your fear, that you have to have abundance to, no, you do not, which is, again, thank you from a consumer side of things to not be a completionist. Now, these animal abilities are done in one of 2 different ways in 4 smatterings. And, my own terminology aside, let's talk about that for a second. So essentially what you've got going on in this tableau building system, again, like I've already recapped, remains almost exactly the same. The main difference is these animals and their incorporation. They slightly alter just a small nuance of that. You'll notice that these cards here actually have two sides, a global ability on one side and then an individual ability on the other. These cards are acquired in case you're, again, a heavy strategist via a draft situation rather than a random draw. And what you do is you do the old draft pass style of things that you're familiar with. Draw 4, pass 3, keep 1. Pass 2, keep 2, and then you'll have 4 cards in your hand again. Keep whichever 2 of the 4 you want. Simultaneously, you will choose one of these cards at the beginning of the game and place it between the first player and the last player. And that's going to integrate as an end of round activation for the global ability that applies to everyone across the board. And that will continue to be at the end of the round. Now, side segue right here, pros and cons of that already so far. Pro, you know predictably what's going to happen at the end of every round. Am I going to get additional resources? Am I going to be able to convert additional resources? Which resources can I convert? Is it going to be helpful for more endgame scoring? Is there just going to be a passive ability that's going to activate? Because those are the 4 approaches that both of these ability sides of the cards will be doing. And so you can start to plan accordingly. Now, the flip side of these individual abilities are starred from 1 to 3 in the upper left-hand corner based on the amount of complexity that you'll be potentially looking at and dealing with and comfortable with in terms of your approach to strategy. These animals are not limited to 1, but some of these animals have multiple that will be splayed out and traveling across your tableau potentially as a way to activate, gain, or manipulate those resources that you're already so fond of doing the same thing with already. And that's the cleverness of it. It's not doing anything different, quote unquote, with that, but it's giving you another additional way to cause manipulation in a slight adjacency while giving you options that you can manage. And they are manageable. And because, again, as I always say, I am not a good Eurogamer. I can do this, which means you can do it. Now, the main key part, though, that we haven't touched on yet is, well, Chris, how do you activate those one-time abilities? Well, that goes back, as I alluded to earlier, the leaf tie-in. You'll remember that these leaves are then still, like in the base game, utilized to activate the fauna victory points when you meet those conditions. And so you will still place them accordingly and utilize them in the same manner to fill up for victory points. However, this is where the tie-in for the animal kingdom comes in, because as you get to choose at the beginning of the game, 1 or even 2 of those cards that you're keeping, depending on if you want to have a little bit more of a simple standard mode or the advanced mode, keeping 2 of them. Play with 2, it's better. And so what you're ending up doing is when you use one of these leaves, well, you can then activate 1 or both of your animals in any particular order to said manipulate in the ways that they are going to allow you to do so. And that is the main key feature, right? Getting victory points there, getting more manipulation here. I've got red pandas, I've got red kangaroos, I've got reindeers, I've got peafowls, I've got squirrel monkeys, I've got Komodo dragons, I've got freaking awesome elephants here, as well as just the animal meeples that are absolutely and utterly fantastic. They're not just blobs of wood that you can't tell what they are if they didn't have some drawings on them. They're actually shaped well, and that's always a small kudos that I have to give, especially even as a prototype. But herein lies the other big change that goes along with them. It's a small nuanced issue, but it allows you to potentially change the strategic approach of your gameplay in Earth as a whole, which is the high risk, high reward status of this. Those leaves that I just mentioned, you only have so many of them in order to activate the fauna areas for the victory points. And you would normally, when you get to play them in the first place, get to activate afterwards. However, maybe let's say you're behind, or let's say that things are really in a crunch and I really need the more active manipulation of some of my other animals in order to do the things I need to do, because everyone knows that experience of a Euro game where you go, I wish I could just do this one more thing and then I could do this, this, and this, especially on that last turn. You know that you've had that experience of what I'm talking about. And this allows that of the manipulation of the leaf, because if you choose to forego this, you can discard it altogether to then also activate your animals immediately. And so if you're choosing high risk, high reward of losing one of these leaves to potentially then forgo activating anything over here additionally, because maybe one of them is just completely out of shot for you 3/4 of the way through the game, and your strategy has pivoted and turned so far away from it that it's unachievable in the first place, burn it, baby. Burn it to the ground and go. And that's what this allows for. Now, I mentioned that there are 4 different ways that these are going to be activating, both in the global and the unique individual person abilities of the converting resources, the creating resources, the active abilities, and then also the endgame scoring. The tricky part is, and for the endgame scoring especially, what you'll be doing is you'll actually be placing, for example, tokens, resources on these cards that do not leave. And these are going to be victory points at the end of the game. So once you allocate them here, though, they're not removable. So you have to be very careful about the amount that you're willing to allocate. But you'll also notice, for example, here on a lot of these cards, the reindeer, for example, says move to an adjacent area on your tableau. So these animals are going to be actively moving across different parts of your tableau based on their actual habitats. Meaning, if you have the polar bear, he ain't going to the desert no matter how hard you try. So that adjacency starts to not only play into the combo resource-driven activation aspect of your turn-by-turn action following system and color combinations, but the actual animal manipulations as well as you're going along, because otherwise your animal might be stuck and not able to fully utilize the ability that you've said taken in the first place. And that's probably the biggest downside and biggest trouble I can see, is if this doesn't get integrated well. If you're just grabbing based off of ability and you don't match this, you could be in a hard way in a very early situation in the game. And that could be the biggest make it or break it with this big stack of cards, right? That maybe has the stuff come out that you want that matches up with this and maybe doesn't. And that's going to be the biggest Achilles heel of this game regardless. That has not changed. Oh, look at the little red panda. Anyway, let's talk about a few of these cards so you can see a few abilities of these animals to get a sense of how they're going to be manipulating. So here, for example, we start with the peafowl. Move up to 2 times. Activate any that are on this space that they moved onto, and then draw. Then you've got the reindeer. Move to a specific terrain anywhere on your tableau. Usually they have to be more adjacent. Adjacent actually meaning up, down, left, or right, or diagonally in this case. Remove all on that newly occupied space and place them here. So again, do you want to actually take those off? Do you still need them for resource manipulation? Are you storing them all up on there just in case and then wiping them out at the end of the game? But be careful. The global ability right here, spend growth from a plant in order to get cards at the end of the turn, at the end of the round, if you will. And then on the other side, you have from the plant or the space that the red panda occupies, again, growth for cards. So again, it's a manipulation in the same way, depending on which animal it is, no matter what side it's on. Move to a flora with a color in its name anywhere on your tableau. Split up those resources anyway between the newly one and the 8 adjacent. And so those are the types of things that you're going to be utilizing along the way. Does it work? Yeah, it works. Again, if you gave me hands down, no questions asked sort of situation, I would easily pick this up because I think this is a better fit for me personally speaking with how it integrates so smoothly that I, again, didn't have a problem with abundance. Again, I feel like sometimes we're too eager to just add layers and layers of mechanics on. I'm sorry, all you heavy Euro people in the first place, heavy worker placements. They're like, you can't have enough of that, Chris. But, you know, Earth already straddles a fine line with the analysis paralysis, multiple activations, tableau building situation as you get halfway to 3/4 to 80 to 90% of the way through the game. There is so much going on that it becomes a math unfun overload sometimes for certain people. Not me. But this does not create more of a logjam in that way. It just gives you a way that allows you to pivot further, to stay the course, or to alter the trajectory that you may have found yourself on that was no longer what you wished to pursue, or that was clearly falling behind others. It more depends, though, again, on your ability to be a precog and figure out which one of these at the beginning of the game is really going to best behoove you. And that's the trickiest point, because if you're just not a good judge of that, then it's potentially going to leave you high and dry when all of a sudden in the middle of the game you realize that your animal abilities don't match up with your tableau abilities and you're just an idiot in the first place. Not that that happens to anyone at all that you know, right? You wouldn't know anyone like that. And so that's probably the biggest issue. And again, it's well, can you deal with that? Or are you going to house rule something along the lines of allowing a swap tease? Because you could do that. Or the other thing that just, caught my mind is, with these global abilities, right? For example, it is nice and it's predictable in the strategic manner that it's the same one for the whole game at the end of every round. So you know what's going to get triggered. You can account for that and plan for that in your strategy. I wouldn't also mind a variant that said round 1, do this one. Round 2, do that one. Yeah, it's going to be a little more, or keep. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more thinking ahead. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more pivot. I wouldn't mind it, but I also know why they didn't do it, because I could see that at the same time being a little bit too much for people in that regard. So I have no qualms with it either the way it is whatsoever. So that's it. That's Earth, that's Animal Kingdom, and that's why it has, well, honestly, overachieved and outperformed what I was expecting, because truth be told, I was pretty trepidatious of what this was going to bring, already knowing my feelings on abundance and going, oh geez, if I include this and abundance, I'm gonna be a little bit, ooh, no, because the whole purpose of this game and the line that this straddles in the first place is that it's already significantly leaning towards the analysis paralysis situation, and anything that could tip that over the edge, not for you, but for, say, casual or I want to get this to the table with people who are learning this style of game, that could be a real significant barrier, especially if, you're trying to all do all the cool stuff at once, because this is cool. My only concern is if you did that, then you just have to be very careful to make sure that people are maybe using ones that are a lot more adaptable and freeform rather than some of the, need to only be on specific types of areas in that way. So you could easily just rig it up like that and, integrate it very nicely that way. So there you go. I like it. I like it a lot. You can play without it and not feel like you're missing something. It still will be utilized as you're playing it. It's not one of those expansions where you can include it and you just completely forget about it because it doesn't tie in as well, and it doesn't increase the creep in any of those ways that I mentioned that make the accessibility of a game like this, which is already sometimes a bit much for, some people, any more of a problem from that aspect. So 2 thumbs up for this one. There you go. Inside Up Games. They sent it to me, and wow, I'm impressed even more so. There you go. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day. See you around. Subscribe. I have a Patreon too. Hit me up.